Good morning. It's 4:30 in the morning here. Um, and I'm sorry I missed the talks earlier today. The talk that Minda and I are doing is on objective measures of near versus far out of field teaching. And it's going to focus on secondary English. I'm an associate professor of secondary education at Texas State University, and Minda's a professor of literacy. And we co-founded and co-direct the Ready Center, which is a research center that focuses on educator equity and excellence. So we do a lot of work on teacher preparation, teacher employment, and student achievement. Um, the first paper that I have found that talks about this concept of teaching subject specialization as a continuum was the Luft Hanuschen Hobbs and Turner paper and focused on science, similar to what Harleen was talking about. And they proposed that out of field was a continuum with some preparation, some areas of specialization being nearer to the infield subject that was being taught versus others that were far away. If somebody knows of a paper that was earlier than this that talked and brought up this conception, I'd love to know it. This was the earliest one I found. And so we're going to be looking into this topic using the English data that we have. So in Texas, secondary English is actually the class that is taught most out of field. As you can see, out of the 2.1 million classes that we looked at, almost 600,000 of those classes were being taught by a teacher who was not licensed to teach English, secondary English. These are all secondary subjects. Math was second, and physical education was third. So our focus was on the class that's taught most out of field. Let's see what the impacts are. So the research question that we started with was, can we use value-added modeling results for secondary English to objectively classify teachers' licensure as near versus far? So the idea is, look at how much students grow academically from one year to the next, and then use that information aggregated at the license level to determine which teachers were closest to the fully prepared, fully licensed teachers in English, and compare those. So in Texas, to understand some of the policy context around teaching licensure, it's important to know that in Texas, a teacher can hold multiple licenses, and they vary by subject and by grade band. So we have over 40 different licenses that a teacher can hold. The early grades in like early childhood through grade 6 are subject general, so that a teacher will teach all subjects. In the middle school and secondary grade levels, then the licenses become subject specific and are grade banded, usually grade 7 through grade 12, grade 8 through grade 12, things like that. In general, since the 1990s, the licenses are valid for 5 years. So a teacher has to renew the license at the end of that 5-year period after having done professional development in that subject area and things like that. And this is important because some of the data we're going to talk about are people who originally were certified in English but let their license lapse, presumably because they weren't teaching it. And then Texas also has clearly defined rules about which licenses are required in order to be teaching in field. And if you don't have one of those licenses, then you are technically teaching out of field. So there's about 90 pages of documentation in state rule about what constitutes in-field versus out of field. So it's a great place to do this kind of research. So from a data preparation standpoint, what we have access to all of the state data that exists around student enrollment, student course taking, teacher assignment, So we selected all students who had been taught secondary English from fall of 2012 through it was through spring of 2020. And we selected all students in grades 7 through 10. We were able to link those data to the teacher who taught the course. And then we were able to link the initial teacher licensure that the person had for teaching. So if they were prepared to teach history, but they were teaching an English class, we noted that they were originally prepared for history. And then we determined whether at the time the person was teaching, whether they were teaching in-field versus out-of-field. We conducted the value-added modeling analysis for each of the different grades, and we did those independently. So the grade 10 English analysis was separate from the grade 9 English analysis, because we wanted to look at what the experience of the teachers teaching a particular course over time. And then we aggregated the student growth scores to the teacher level. So just to give you a sense of the scale of the data we're working with, for the grade 10 analysis, we had 1.67 million students in this analysis. We had 1.8 million in the grade 9, about 1.8 million in each of the other grades. So 1.8 million unique students that we're tracking over time with prior English scores, looking at their change in performance over time. So the most common initial licenses for teachers who were teaching out of field were the English. So English, so this is a person who was initially prepared to teach English, but let their license lapse. And at the time they were teaching English, they were technically out of field. So they had acquired a license in another subject area, had been teaching that other subject area, and the English license had lapsed, so they had not been teaching it. Generalist means that they have a license that allows them to teach all of the different core subjects: English, reading, math, science, and social studies. There were physical education, history, social studies. Spanish was actually a fairly common license for people teaching English. Special education, and then there were people who had multiple non-English licenses. So they were certified to teach physical education and history. So we lumped them into a multiple non-English grouping. So then we did hierarchical linear modeling with class at level 1, teacher at level 2, campus at level 3. So we took into consideration differences in school characteristics, differences in teacher characteristics, and we predicted the value-added modeling scores. And then we compared the teachers prepared to teach secondary English. So these are, each one of the comparisons we're going to talk about is compared to teachers who were prepared to teach secondary English and were teaching secondary English. So they were fully in-field teachers. And so this is the results for grade 10 English, and they're ordered from least negative to most negative. And so what this means, the results here, I'll walk you through this one and that'll make more sense on the next couple of screens. The English coefficient means that the students who were taught by teachers who originally had been prepared for secondary English but had let their license lapse were doing slightly worse than the students taught by teachers who were prepared for English and had a valid license at the time they were teaching. This was a marginally significant finding, so it was slightly not quite statistically significant. But the rest of these licensors, these differences are statistically significant. And so the generalist, the person who holds a generalist license in early childhood through grade 6 or middle school grades, so they're prepared to teach all of the different subjects, They are significantly, their students scored significantly lower than the teachers prepared in English, but they did it, it was the most near of the other subject licenses. That is then followed by history and then Spanish. And as you start to get down here, these are the most far away licenses from an objective standpoint. So the physical education, teachers who were originally prepared in physical education, the students experienced 0.21 of a standard deviation less growth, which is about 2.5 to 3 months of growth that the students are losing. And then teachers with multiple licenses in special ed are experiencing even less academic growth. So that's grade 10 English. Here's grade 9 English. These are all significantly different from teachers who were prepared to teach English and have a valid license at the time. But again, they're ordered from nearest to farthest. And now social studies drops down considerably here. But again, special ed and PE are the farthest away of the teachers teaching out of field. The English and generalists are the nearest out of field. Here's the grade 8 English and reading class. The English and generalists, again, these are not significant differences, so they are equivalent to the teachers who are licensed in teaching grade 8 in-field. And then you can see we get farther and farther away as we go down toward the Spanish and special education. So again, the social studies, PE, Spanish and special education, those teachers, their students are experiencing the least amount of growth. And then grade 7 English reading, similar finding that the English teachers who let their license lapse and the generalists are not significantly different. So they're equivalent. That would be considered very near out of field. History was marginal, even though it was a larger coefficient. And again, PE, social studies, special ed, and Spanish are the farthest out of field licenses. So we were excited by these results. In a lot of cases, these results made sense to us intuitively about what should be a near out of field license. But the thing that was also interesting is the fact that the results for grade 7 and 8 were different than the results for grade 9 and 10. And in 7 and 8 are middle school grades for us. They're generally taught in different kinds of schools than the high school grades in 9 through 12. So we really want to dig into these results more and understand more of the nuance of this. We also want to do the same thing with math. But what we also did, excuse me, is in the analysis, we considered the amount of time the person had been teaching versus the amount of time the person had been teaching that course. So if a person has been teaching English in grade 7 out of field, but they've been doing it for 5 years, we wanted to take that into consideration in the modeling. And what we found is similar to what Harleen was saying about the PCK, the subject-specific PCK, is that the more the teacher had experience teaching that particular course, even though they were teaching it out of field, that experience was actually more valuable from a student growth standpoint than teaching experience generically was. And the differences were 5 to 20 years. The 1 year of teaching the subject, the course, was actually worth 5 to 20 years of teaching experience in general, even if you're teaching out of field. So the experience teaching the class is actually a really important factor. And what we have seen in our data is that principals move teachers around a lot, even when they're teaching out of field. So the teacher never gets to develop any expertise in teaching that class, even if they're teaching out of field. So what we're trying to get across to principals is stop moving your teachers around. Let them develop some expertise in teaching the specific class that they're teaching. Mm. So future projects, we're refining the modeling and publishing the results. We want to track the effectiveness of teachers teaching out of field, and Minda's going to be talking about that next. We've actually been identifying teachers and then talking with them. And then we want to do similar near versus far analyses with math and with science. We've got data on middle school science with biology, chemistry, and physics. So we're going to be looking at those subjects in the future. And here's our email addresses. Thank you.